What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back with another video. This has been a heavily requested video ever since I made the one going over what I believe is the optimal strategy to use if you have a top 4 pick. That was the anchor running back strategy, and if you haven't seen that one yet, you probably should. I'll link it in the description box down below. But a lot of you are wondering, well, what the best strategy is if you don't have a top 4 pick, since anywhere between, I guess, half if you're an 18 league, but anywhere between half and 75% of you are not going to have a top 4 pick in your most important league. So today we're going to go over how I would approach a draft if I had a mid first round pick, so anywhere from, say, picks like 5 through 8. I'll be assuming like a 10, 12, or 14 team league for this video, but remember, in 8-team leagues, tight end, quarterback, they're much more important, so they need to go a little bit earlier. And then in 16-team leagues, it's a lot more dangerous to just abandon a position for too long, since the waiver wire is going to be extremely thin, and so finding breakouts that way is going to be much more difficult. But assuming, a relatively normal league size, how would I personally approach a draft from the 5 through 8 picks? So we're going to answer that in a second, but first, of course, have to start things off as usual. Stat of the day. Yesterday's stat was what quarterback lost the most yards being sacked last season, and that was for the entire season, not in just one game. The answer is Russell Wilson. Daniel Madison was the first to get that right on YouTube, and at CollinGrace15 was the first to get that right on Twitter. Today's stat. Who was the only quarterback to have a game with a perfect passer rating last season? And I didn't even look up like a minimum attempts, but it wasn't someone who threw like 5 attempts. They played for the whole game. It was an actual game played, not just one pass attempt. All right, let's talk about strategy. And I'm going to go over standard scoring first, but my reasoning is going to be apparent when we're done. So you really are just going to have to trust me with this one. I know that the vast majority of you do play in leagues that are half PPR, full PPR, not in standard, which is good because standard is just an awful format. But I want to go over that one first as like a longer example, because it's going to make what we do or what we should do in half and in full PPR much more clear. So please, please, please trust me on this one. I know you probably don't play standard, but it's good to go over it as an example to make the other ones more clear. So in standard, let's say you're picking 5 or 6 and you really want one of Adams or Kelsey because they're obviously incredible players. They are the most likely players to lead their respective positions in fantasy points, in value at the end of the season, and they obviously have league-winning upside even in standard where running back is king. Like Adams could score 20 touchdowns, Kelsey could outscore the next best tight end by 5 points per game. Like they obviously have league-winning upside. So let's say we want to take one of them. In a 12-team league, we're going to assume exactly 12 team, but the strategy is going to be very similar if you're in 10, 12, 14. Remember what I said. We're going to assume 12 team though, and so then you're not picking, if you have 5 or 6 pick, you're not picking again until like 19 or 20. And while the exact players left in that range are going to depend on the site you're using, the people you're drafting with, you're probably looking in standard scoring at like Dobbins and Montgomery are probably the best running backs available in the second round. And then probably guys like Metcalf and Jefferson, like that tier of wide receiver, will be left. Now, I'm going to assume you took Adams first. We did do a video. We talked about how Adams should be ranked ahead of Kelsey. Let's say you take Adams first. And maybe you're not in love with the idea of Dobbins or Montgomery in the second round. You're like, I like them, but they're not second round picks. And so you opt to load up at wide receiver. You take Metcalf, still an incredible wide receiver. These two in particular, Adams and Metcalf, are phenomenal wide receivers to target in standard scoring because, Metcalf could also have, 15, 17 touchdowns this season. They're both really good targets in standard. So let's say you take both of them. Your next pick is at 29 or 30, where, another 4 running backs are probably off the board. You're probably looking at like Clyde, Darrell Henderson, Miles Sanders, Josh Jacobs as your best options, and now you're in trouble. There are epic wide receivers still on the board, but wide receiver is quite literally the least valuable position in this scoring format. So even though you could like luck into a really nice starting wide receiver core. If you take wide receiver again, third round, you take CeeDee Lamb. Now you have Adams, Metcalf, and CeeDee Lamb as just like a dream wide receiver core. You're getting crushed at the most valuable position in this format, and realistically the most valuable position in any scoring format, which is running back. So how did this happen? Well, I have the vast majority of the top 20 running backs listed as targets on the website. Pretty much any site out there is going to have, like, in general, the top 20 is pretty locked in. They're all phenomenal picks. They're all guys you should get on the roster. I know we make videos saying, well, who's the most likely to bust, in the first round? Who's the most likely to bust in the second round? The fact of the matter is, every single one of the top 20 running backs is an elite running back and is great in fantasy. That's just a fact, okay? And for those of you with access to the website, which I highly recommend getting, if you care about winning the season, but for those of you with access, you see all those targets in the top 20, right? But how many targets are there after that? It's less than 5, at least as of recording this, and not counting like sleepers. Once you get into like the 12th, 13th round, I'd make them called sleepers instead of targets. But let's be honest, there's not that many sleepers either, right? It's not like we're envisioning, 10, 15 running backs in round 14, 15, 16 to all break out this season, right? I bring this up because most people assume that they can just take the value at other positions if there's a big run at running back, which does tend to happen in standard scoring formats, since, well, those other people are going to have to go back to attacking these positions in the middle rounds. And so I'll take these values at wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, and then I'll go back to running back when they're done taking them. But there is very little in the middle rounds that I want at running back, and that's across any format. I don't care what format we're in. There's very little I like at the running back position in the middle rounds. Sure, there are options, but they're not good ones. And given that running back is by far the most important position for team success in fantasy in any scoring format, you're hurting yourself by not investing high draft capital at that position. And I know like 90% of you are like, okay, we get it, okay? Take running backs in standard scoring formats. What about these other league forms? I promise, I'm going to go over half and full PPR in a second. But I bring up standard first because it's the easiest for people to understand how positional value works and how your early draft decisions will impact the rest of your build. Remember the example I just went over. We got really, really good players, but we're stacked at the deepest position in fantasy, and we're now forced to take running backs in a range where we don't like most of them. So a first 6 rounds might look something like this. Adams, Metcalf, Lamb, but then Jacobs, Javonte Williams, and Kareem Hunt. That's not like terrible by any means, but it could honestly be dominant, if Javonte Williams takes over, like I think he can, if Chubb gets hurt and now Kareem Hunt is the lead back, like it could be a really, really strong lineup. But what if we just reverse course a little bit, even if it meant reaching a bit on running back early? So instead of taking Adams at 5 or 6, let's grab Zeke. And then instead of taking the value of DK Metcalf, that's still a really good pick, let's reach a little bit and take J.K. Dobbins. Now we'll still keep CeeDee Lamb in the 3rd round since we haven't grabbed a wide receiver yet, and he's still a phenomenal pick in the 3rd round. So now our team is Zeke, Dobbins at running back, and then CeeDee Lamb at wide receiver. Now in rounds 4 through 6, we're not forced to attack the running back position. We can take Josh Allen in the 4th, still Javonte Williams in the 5th, but then go back to wide receiver and take a guy we love in Jerry Jeudy in the 6th round. So both teams have Lamb, both teams have Jeudy, but the first build has Adams, Metcalf, Jacobs, and Williams, and the second has Zeke, Dobbins, Allen, and Jeudy. And while it might feel like the first team is stronger, running back is so much more valuable that the second team does come in with a much higher value rating. So taking, into account how valuable each player is in the scoring format, that second team that went with running back earlier is more valuable. Taking Zeke also allows you to use an anchor running back approach if you really want to. That's what I mentioned earlier is my favorite strategy with a top 4 pick. The anchor running back build would be the one on the right that I showed on the screen, or maybe I'm showing on the screen right now. So for those of you listening to the podcast, that would be if you took Zeke in the first round and then you did Metcalf in the second, CeeDee Lamb in the third, Josh Allen in the fourth, you went back to running back in the fifth with still Javonte Williams, and then you took Judy in the sixth. And again, the exact players aren't like what we really need to be focusing on in this video. I think all of these guys are quality picks, but this is not, a targets video. This is not an avoids video. This is a strategy video. Just the idea of taking these positions, seeing how our team works out if we do so. Here are my 2 hesitancies with using anchor running back with a mid-first round pick, and it's why I said I like it with top 4. First, for it to work, you're going to need that running back to finish top 5. You're pretty unlikely to win a championship if you use the anchor running back approach and then that first running back that you take finishes like 13th in points per game. You're probably not winning a championship. You're going to need them to finish top 5. And since the top 4 running backs are so much more likely to finish top 5 than everyone else, I prefer doing it with them. But the second point, even if you're like, oh, I think Zeke can finish top 5, then you can do it. But my second point is like the first 4 teams, like they're much more likely to implement this approach, at least if they're paying attention this season. You guys that drafted McCaffrey, Cook, Kamara, Henry, if you drafted them, you're probably using a very similar approach to this. And so they're probably going to have a better team than you, right? If you're using the same strategy, but their first pick is better and the rest of their picks aren't like that much different, they probably have a stronger build. And I don't want to go into a draft knowing that like the people in front of me have a stronger build. I want to try and make the strongest build. So those are my hesitancies. At the end of the day though, I do think the top 7 or 8 running backs, they have a very, very good shot of still finishing top 5. And if you believe that maybe Zeke or Aaron Jones or maybe like a Saquon Barkley, you really truly believe one of them is going to finish in the top 5, even with a mid-first round pick, I do think that using anchor running back can be a viable strategy. And here is the most important part. Even in standard, which is why I wanted to start off with standard scoring format. Even in a scoring system that heavily favors the running back position, your teams will turn out better if you select one stud running back in the first, use them as like the anchor to your roster, and then build up the rest of your starting lineup around them. And your team will turn out even stronger if you not only take that anchor, but you pair them with another high-end running back, especially if one becomes a value or if you don't feel strongly about your first running back. So if you take Ezekiel Elliott in the middle of the first round, and then you say either one, I'm not in love with Ezekiel Elliott, so in the second round I'm going to take another running back, or, oh, look, a really high-end running back has fallen to me in the middle of the second round, I'm going to pair Zeke with them. That is how I believe the strongest builds are made with a first-round pick in like the middle of the first round this season, because there's another factor we need to add on here that I do believe is extremely important to think about. Who are our sleepers this season, and how many do we have at each respective position? As of recording this, I currently have 13 wide receivers listed as a sleeper or a target in round 10 on. So like with a value grade of round 10 on. They're going to go in different spots depending on your site. For running backs, the number is 5. There are a ton more wide receivers that I love drafting late, but that's not really the case for running back. There are not that many that I like late. There are not that many that I like middle. And everyone realistically knows that when you're drafting a running back late, you're really just drafting like high upside backups on good teams. If the starter goes down, they're going to be solid, even though like the vast majority of them are going to find themselves on free agency. So there's no edge when drafting running backs late. Everyone knows you just take your Pollards, you take your Xavier Jones, your Stevensons, your Madisons, like just Latavius Murray if he wins the job, if not Freeman. Like everyone knows that. There's no edge, and so you can make the pick, and it's like that's a pick most people would have made. We're trying to find an edge. And there is an actual edge at drafting wide receiver late. we can do better at identifying talent, identifying opportunity, and we're much more accurate at doing so at that position. I want to be taking as many shots as possible at wide receiver late, meaning I can't be using too many spots at wide receiver up early, especially in the first few rounds, because then, I've spent so much draft capital at the position that I'm forced to load up on other positions and will therefore have fewer opportunities at wide receiver in the middle rounds and the later rounds. So by taking running back early, even if it feels like a reach, I'm still giving myself an opportunity to draft a position that I love later in the draft. So again, by spending a bunch of draft capital at wide receiver early and therefore skipping out on running back, I force myself to take a bunch of running backs in the middle rounds, take flyers late, because I haven't spent a lot of draft capital position. I need upgrades later in the draft, and I probably need to do it with volume because I'm not getting elite players in the middle rounds. And so if I went into a draft thinking I'm only going to draft 5 running backs, but I don't take one until a 5th round, well, now I probably have to draft like 7 running backs because I know if I draft 5, 4 of them are probably going to bust. And that's going to leave me extremely thin at the position. But if I start off the draft with 2 elite running backs, now I don't need to take as many total running backs. And so I can maybe take one of those mid running backs, turn it to a wide receiver. Take one of those later running backs, turn it to a wide receiver. And those are the ranges where I love wide receiver. And so you see how it can kind of snowball. The things that you do early in the draft will dictate how you can approach the draft and what types of players, what positions you can take late. So for those of you who are like, okay, that's nice, but you still said you talk about my scoring format and you haven't yet. I know, but think about it. We just went over a scoring format where running back is the most important position by 7 miles, right? And I think the optimal build is to just take a few early and then mostly getting wide receivers, quarterbacks, tight ends middle, filling in running back around that where there's good value. So what do you think a good strategy is if we shift away from running back importance? As we shift from standard to half PPR, from half PPR to full PPR, where running backs become less and less and less valuable, you still need to start them, right? And I still love the mid and late wide receivers, but the running back position is less valuable. Well, wouldn't that mean that the strategy becomes even more strong, right? And wouldn't we want to push it to the extreme? And since it becomes even easier to take high-end running backs early as we move to these formats, because in standard scoring, the running backs fly off the board, but then in half, and especially in full PPR, well, now elite running backs are available later than they should be. People start taking those wide receivers early, even though the actual players of these positions have not changed. Even though I still want a build where I'm not attacking running back early, I'm not attacking running back late. It doesn't matter what the scoring format is, I just don't like the running backs in those ranges. And since it becomes even easier for me to take running backs early, and now I probably need to take fewer of them, now I can just go all in on the strategy. I can take running back, and then completely abandon the position for a very long time because it's not as important that I hit, and I've locked up 2 spots that I feel very good about. Well, now I'm waiting really long. I'm taking a bunch of chances, and I'm grabbing still players at wide receiver, at quarterback in the ranges that I like them the most. I did this exact same exercise out for half and full PPR, and the results are now on the screen. And even though it's going to feel really, really good taking wide receivers early in like a full and a half PPR format, again, assuming that we have like a pick in like the 5 through 8 range, think about what it's forcing us to do. Now we need to grab mid-range running backs because we spent, a lot of draft capital wide receiver, and we got to make up for it somewhere at running back. And again, like I tried to pick really good mid-range running backs, but there's no way I feel confident about a running back core that's like Javonte Williams, Kareem Hunt, Chase Edmonds, Michael Carter. Like, I think they all have upside. I think, sure, there's a scenario where like all of them work out and this team crushes. But if you told me at the end of the season only one of them was even fantasy relevant, I wouldn't be like all that surprised. No matter what the scoring format is, and no matter how I change these builds, because as you can see, comparing half PPR, full PPR, like I did try to take different positions in different rounds. teams still come out stronger overall if we can get 2 top 13 running backs, an elite quarterback in round 4 or 5, whichever you think you can get away with. Obviously, round 5 is more preferable, so you can get a better wide receiver in round 4. But if you think you have to spend a 4th round pick on the quarterback, do it. We go with a late tight end and then wide receivers, middle and late, and just filling in those gaps where maybe we don't like those positions with running backs. Because again, even if running backs are less valuable in your format, you still got to draft them. You still got to start a few of them each week. And you're still working off the exact same pool of players. And because of how drafts work out when you have the 5 through 8 pick, it's very likely that that first pick, you're going to have access to one of Ezekiel Elliott or Aaron Jones, especially if you're in a half and a full PPR format where people really do want Adams, Kelsey, Hill. And in the second round, it's pretty likely, with that pick 17 through 20, you're probably going to have access to one of Gibson, Najee Harris, and Joe Mixon, right? And I truly believe that you're best off starting off your draft with any combination of those players that you like, of those two groups. And I do think that a true anchor running back strategy is a little bit less ideal since you don't have that massive edge at running back. But by taking 2 of them to start off, you're still allowing yourself the upside of just loading out your wide receivers and quarterbacks and giving yourself more opportunities to take wide receiver late since you don't need to draft as many total running backs since you started off with 2 of them. Now, I have left out early tight end simply because when you have a mid-first round pick, if we're taking running back to start, that means you're not getting Kelsey. When we get to the second round, I think that's a reach, taking Waller or Kittle in the second round. Then you get to the third round, Waller's probably gone. Kittle's now your only option. And I do think in the middle of the third round, in standard, it's a no. In half PPR, it's probably a no. That's probably too early to take Kittle. In PPR, it's like fine, but that's probably the only one that I'd be going after there. And I'd still probably prefer like the wide receivers. Like, I think it's pretty unlikely that I'm taking Kittle if I have like the 5 through 8 pick in that third round. I haven't been doing it that much this season. I think it is fine, but I think it's more reserved for like a full PPR format if you really want to, or being in like a later pick in the third round. Also, if you do end up with the 5 pick, and one of the big 4 does fall to you, well, now anchor running back is absolutely on the table as potentially being optimal. But I do want to mention it's less viable in full PPR simply because it's pretty likely that McCaffrey, Cook, and Kamara are the first 3 picks off the board. And then let's say someone like goes with Adams and you're like, oh, cool, I got Henry at 5, now I can do anchor running back. Not as much, just because Henry is simply not as valuable in a full PPR format because he doesn't have those receptions. And so I don't think I would do it in full PPR. If you're in half PPR and Henry falls to you at 5, go for it, do anchor running back. But again, in a full PPR format, I don't think he's providing enough of an edge because he can still have like 150 yards and a score and like realistically only scored 22 fantasy points. Like realistically that can happen. He can have like just 1 or 0 receptions in games. And so he's got that lower floor. He's just not as good in full PPR. And so if you're at 5, he falls to full PPR, I probably wouldn't do it. I'd probably do the strategy we talked about today and just grab that second running back, load up there, load up on every other position in the middle rounds and in the later rounds, and just fill in a few running backs for the rest of the draft because you just simply don't need as many if you're taking 2 early. So I know that was a lot, but maybe watch the last like 5 to 10 minutes again if you're at all confused. I think I went over things like multiple times, so I think it'll all make sense. But the overarching theme with any draft strategy is how are you attacking the running back position? And again, with a mid first round pick, so picks 5 through 8, I have personally decided that my ideal outcome is to try and get 2 top 13 running backs to take an elite quarterback in round 4 or 5. Again, whatever you personally think you can get away with your league, like what format you're in, what site you're using, who you're drafting with. Then to take probably a later round tight end, whichever one you personally like. And later round can mean anywhere from like 9 on. That's like later round. Wide receivers loading up middle and late where we love them. And then filling in those gaps with whatever running backs you want. But hey, if you feel differently, you think you have a better strategy that you think works out for you in the middle of the first round, well, then let me know in the comment section below. And if you understand the overall strategy here, but you are worried that you're going to maybe pick the wrong players, then all you got to do is go to our website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com, look at our rankings. We've got rankings for every scoring format along with projections, risk grades, premium videos, a private chat where you can ask me your specific questions if I can't answer them in these videos, and a whole lot more. So make sure you check that out again, thefantasyfootballadvice.com. That'll do it for this one. Hope you all enjoy. If you did, then how about hitting that like button? And how about subscribing to the channel if you're new here? But thanks for watching.